one, and we are live.
Hi, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott, and I'm joined this evening by Dr. Marianne Trent, all the way up in Coventry. Welcome, Marianne. Really good to have you.
Hi, thank you.
Lovely to see you. We were just talking before we came on air about how colour coordinated we are, which is really cool. I like those cushions you've got, Marianne. They're great.
Thank you.
So we're sort of somehow unconsciously connected. I'm just going to do the usual introductions I do. This is a live show. It'd be lovely to hear from you. We're streaming on various platforms, Facebook, YouTube, what else? Twitter, on Periscope. I don't know we're on LinkedIn yet, but we hope to be at some point. So you can join us in one of those platforms. It'd be great. You can leave comments. I've asked Jennifer, who is part of my team, to sort of scoop up the comments for me tonight and join in. The other way you can join in is you can give me a call. My number is 07506 319 745. So give us a call. That should be scrolling up on the screens as well, as if by magic. Mr. James Blake in the background is doing all of that stuff, I think, typing things in, and hopefully tidying up his room. So while you can't see him, while he's got the camera off, maybe he'll just sort of spruce it all up for us. And so it'd be lovely to hear you. You can call, you can join in any of those. We also repost this, so if this isn't a Wednesday evening in UK time between 9 and 10:30 p.m, don't call, because you'll be calling me at some really weird odd time and the show won't be on and you've been watching repeat. So we're like that. But if it's live, if it's Wednesday, come and join us. It'd be great to hear from you. Marianne, I've just sort of vaguely introduced you. You're a clinical psychologist, I believe.
I am. Yes, I am.
One of those? Tell me what's one of those.
Well, that is a good question.
Okay.
So we are doctorate trained. So you do your undergraduate psychology degree for 3 years, and then you would go and sell your soul to try and do anything you can to get any relevant work experience, to then be able to probably get an honorary voluntary post and then get a paid one if you're lucky. Or research. You can come into it through research, or some people on my course are ex-teachers or ex-nurses. So there is a variety of ways to get in. And then at the moment, it's a doctorate course to become a clinical psychologist. And then that's...
Why clinical? What does that mean, clinical?
Clinical. So it means that you're in a variety of different settings. So you are trained across the lifespan. So you do a number of different placements with people, and right. You have so you're not just research, you're not just education. That sounds really dismissive, but we're trained broadly across a variety of different approaches. So my specialties currently are trauma, so that would be, I'm using EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR for short, and compassion focused therapy, CFT. They're my two go-tos currently. CFT sort of runs through everything I do. So we've trained, as I said, across a variety of techniques and working across a variety of different populations. So whenever I speak to somebody, I'd be able to draw on evidence from working with people with learning disabilities, people who are older, people who are younger, children, a whole spectrum of different people, really.
Brilliant. So we're going to come to all of that and sort of explain some of those terms, but I thought I'd sort of introduce us to that subject, and we can, I think it might be interesting later on to talk about various types of job titles and qualifications, what you're getting, so the public
of course,
and talk about things like accreditation and the various agencies that people might say they're part of, HCPC, VA.
Yeah, of course, really important.
So I think that we're going to get into that. Let's do what we always do during these odd times that we're in, which is just catch up on how are you in these odd times that we're in. So you're a human being first before you're a clinical psychologist. So
I absolutely am, and that is what I say. That's what I say to people. That's what I say to everybody. If you want somebody that's rigid and stuffy, then you're not going to come to me. You're gonna, that's not what you're going to get. So, I was talking about this today. Really, the kind of the amount of change that we've all had to go through in such a quick period of time. So I took part in some interviews actually for lockdown with a researcher, and that was, I think we filmed it in March and it came out in May, but it really focused on where we were at right then and where we'd been when we sort of first heard COVID. And at that time, you know, I was finding it all very difficult. So, you know, it was when the briefings first started, you know, going to see Boris at 5 o'clock before he got poorly, and, you know, the world would sort of stop, and it was horrifying, actually. You know, I found myself thinking, well, usually I can hold things together pretty well. I'm usually pretty calm. I'm usually quite reasoned. I recall, and I feel quite guilty about it now, but I recall quite early on in February, perhaps January, somebody mentioned COVID to me during a clinical session, and being really worried about that. And me kind of saying, well, actually, you know, not everybody who gets COVID dies, and it's a really small population at the moment. It's just in China. You know, this isn't going to be something that we're going to need to be very worried about. I was sort of anti-catastrophizing, really.
Yeah.
And then it very quickly built and spiraled to the point where everyone's suddenly talking about it, and that by itself can be really derailing, can't it? Because it, you know, you sort of get panic mentality. People are starting to run, and you know, you don't know why, but you end up running as well, because you don't want to be caught by whatever's getting you. And so to begin with, it was all quite scary. You know, I lost my father at the tail end of 2017, and I was just thinking, I don't have it within me to lose somebody else really close to me.
Yeah, it was. I mean, one thing,
you know, I'm a mummy. I don't have it within me, because we didn't know at that point.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah. We're having slight problems with your signal.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry. It happens. It's a
Yeah.
live show. This is the nature of a live show. And this is our world at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of our interactions are through these technological things, which who knew that this was going to be life, that we're going to be dependent on broadband speeds just to sort of do anything. So it's really not a problem, just letting you know.
I might get my husband to stop doing anything online.
Is he gaming at the moment?
I don't know what he's doing. Staying busy, staying out of the way.
World domination on one of those online games. He's currently taking over Russia. That's more important than this, which is quite appropriate.
I don't know what you last heard me saying, Noel.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about what you were saying, which really resonated, I think I identified with, was the sense of speed of this thing at the beginning. And I remember exactly that feeling of telling myself and also my clients, you know, look, it's not that serious, because we'd had SARS and we'd had etc., which had, of course, died out of their own accord, and H1N1, if people remember that, and all that sort of stuff. And so there'd been this series of epidemics which had been sort of thought they might become a pandemic, but they hadn't. So I was a little bit complacent, or maybe just in defended denial. I tend to think I was in denial because but then this thing just it went from really far away to suddenly right in your face.
Well,
and like overnight.
I felt like an expert, because I'd been in Thailand during SARS, and it'd all been fine. I'd only had to wear a mask sort of when I was at an airport, and you know, I felt like, you know, if I've survived SARS, then this is all going to be fine, you know.
Yeah.
But I think the media has changed an awful lot. So when I was in Thailand, I'd get the occasional email saying, you know, are you okay? And it's like, yeah, of course. But now we're also switched on, and we've all got our phones with us. So that was 2003, wasn't it? So it's all changed so much since then.
Yeah, I remember that sense as well. It affected me, and I've still got tins of food in the cupboard that I don't need.
Butter beans coming out your ears.
Exactly, and you know that I don't need it. I'm probably never going to eat it. It's going to go to some sort of food bank, harvest festival or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. I remember really caught up in that fear and that sense. And I was telling you before.
And toilet rolls. You've got, like, just in front of the camera. There's just like loads of toilet rolls still everywhere now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the last of the stash.
Be careful with it.
I remember my my ex with my stepson. She did a very funny video of handing him some toilet paper and him having to negotiate for it. He's 9. It was hilarious, but we'd sort of then caught up to speed with it. But it was that whole sort of thing. It suddenly came on. Suddenly there was a whole group type thing, and it's taken me some time to process the experience.
Yeah.
You though, you also, I mean, you have a family with you, your husband,
Yeah.
you have children as well.
Yeah,
so
I do. Yeah.
very sort of different, I think. I'm a single guy at home. My stepson lives in a different country, so I had that particular experience, which was very difficult. But if you don't mind saying, what was it
of
like
course.
being a mum at home, having to deal with this stuff, your own stuff going on, and then you've got your kids? How old are they, by the way?
So very almost 7. He would not allow me to still call him 6. He'd be very upset to know that I had. So it's like a matter of weeks until he's 7.
Got a 7-year-old and
a 4-year-old. Yeah. The 4-year-old he was in his preschool year at the school, and he has not really wanted to do any learning, and we do what we can with him, but that has to be okay. But the 7-year-old is used to a bit more structure and actually responds quite well to that. But it's been difficult because my husband and I have both been working, and when you're doing clinical sessions with people, you have to be fully available. It can't be like, the kids wandering in, because that just won't work. When somebody's paying for your time, and actually, if I'm in the middle of processing a really tricky trauma with grief or something else that's happened, I can't be having, the 4-year-old come in and say, "Mummy, I need you to wipe my bum." That's just, that's just not really, that's just not really forgivable, is it? So, Mummy just has to be, when the door's shut, I have to be out of touch, really. But it hasn't been easy. I never ever, no, I did not ever want to be a home educator. I'm not that person. For lots of people it's the right decision, and that's okay. They've obviously got a feeling that they can do that and that they're good at that. But my kids don't really want to learn from me. I'm happy to teach them, we taught them to read, and but I don't want to do it. And so it's it's very difficult when the kids are going, "I don't want to do it," and I'm also thinking, I don't want to do it either. Should we go and watch Aladdin instead?
I think the answer is always yes to, do you want to go and watch Aladdin instead? I mean, I think that's the default. Yeah, I think I might
we'll just go for that.
No, let's stay with the fractions. Maybe not. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think that we were thrust into these things. One of the things is, I think particularly for families and groups of people that were already living, because there was a lot of talk initially in the lockdown of isolation. And I didn't think for many people that was really the issue. The issue was hothousing and all being in the same space. Families suddenly finding they're in the same space with multiple demands upon that space. And we all try and turn our homes into something, particularly I think those of us that are in the helping professionals, we're thoughtful about the boundaries of our home. We say, "No, I'm not doing this." But then this event happened, and it was forced upon us to sort of throw away those boundary decisions and then look at how we do manage it. So it was quite a challenge to sort of think how you get that sorted out.
I hadn't done any remote work prior to COVID, and so I don't. My husband has an office, but it's full of kind of pictures of the family, and that's just not what I wanted. So we kind of had to. I don't usually do therapy here on my sofa. That I don't. That's not what I would. I'm casual, but I'm not quite that casual. So welcome to my living room, people. I had to kind of find something that felt professional enough. But like you say, it felt safe and felt welcoming, and it's a difficult balance that I wouldn't have imagined striking. But I've really enjoyed remote working, I have to say.
Good. Had you done much online stuff before?
No, never. No.
Right. No. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I think there's a whole series of conversations that were ongoing in our profession and lots of professions about home working, remote working, online working. And those conversations are over now because this was forced.
Because it's worked, hasn't it?
That's right. There's no going back out of that bottle, I think.
Yeah, and definitely. There was very much a mentality of bums on seats because I work in the NHS as well. And but that's actually, with evidence, that's not really needed. Because for a period there was not even any hubs or anything. There was just people tending to work from home, and we were still managing to provide a service and managing to feel like a team. So, in terms of saving NHS cash, then, potentially a lot of bases could be streamlined.
Yeah. I'm getting some questions in, so I'm going to fit, as I said, with the questions. So sometimes my eyes might go down.
That's okay.
Just because I've had a question sent to me, and I'm thinking about when that comes in. So I've got a really good question that's coming, which I'll ask you shortly.
Okay.
But it sort of just thinking about this thing. So I remember doing a lot of research around what was called telehealth.
Yeah.
Still is. And looking at the evidence base for it. And this was a long time ago when I was setting up the company. So it was quite a long time ago. And early in the early days of my private practice, even before I had the company set up on there. And just thinking about these things, about does telehealth work? What's the benefits of it? And I think, as we're talking about, if you don't mind, let's go into it a little bit and look at it, because that's what we are. And look at some of the sort of ideas about how does psychotherapy work. You're okay with that as a term?
Yeah.
Okay, or psychological therapies, whichever.
Yeah.
So I remember doing research, and one of the things that struck me was that there's a really, really successful telehealth organisation. We don't think of them as a telehealth organisation, but when I name them, you'll go, oh yeah, that's right. It's the Samaritans.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And the Samaritans sort of invented telehealth in terms of health, if we think about it. So, and they've been, what, 70 years? 50?
Right.
50 years? 50 years? 60 years, something like that.
It's an institution, isn't it now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, they have a great success at saving lives. They're a mental health service, not so much a psychological therapy service. That's not what they offer. It's a listening service. But it's a successful mental health intervention that is almost exclusively, and always has been, almost exclusively sort of anonymous through the phone. No other resources going on. And in some places, I know they have groups, and that's okay. And before I even trained, when I was an undergraduate, I joined what's called Nightline, which is the student version.
I was just thinking about Nightline and Sane Line services as you're saying that.
And so I started off in Nightline. I did the training, the active listening, and all of that sort of stuff. So, and so that was the sort of when I began to do the research. And the research is quite clear that telehealth works but it doesn't necessarily work in exactly the same way as face-to-face, but it does work. What's your thinking now in terms of where you would be as a clinician in terms of thinking about the use of telehealth and all that sort of stuff?
Well, we've been samples in the NHS about, how much we've enjoyed it and what percentage of it we would like to keep. And, I said as much as 100% would work for me in terms of flexibility, in terms of it making it a speedier access and more equitable access to services. And certainly in my private practice, I'm considering, online only, or, certainly a vastly reduced face-to-face time. And actually, it allows a little bit more flexibility as well. So it allows me I've got an evening clinic once a week now, which I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to do before, because I've just, we worry about safety and worry about being out of the house, and it's more disruptive. So to see 2 or 3 clients of an evening would have taken sort of 4 hours before, whereas now I can do it in less than 3. And it works for me. It's good, and it seems to be working for clients.
I think, the evidence is that it can be just as successful. But I'm going to go on to some of the questions that are coming through on the phone. But I'm just interested in this idea and thinking about things. If we think about why do psychological therapies work? There's lots of reasons, So if we look at cognitive behavioural therapy, for example, it's because we encourage people to change their behaviour. But we also encourage people to change their thinking. And it's the thinking and emotional responses that often what people think about in terms of psychotherapy. So we focus on, maybe just in this conversation briefly, on the sort of cognitive and emotional processes that go on. So one of the theories about why psychological therapies work is this idea that the frontal lobes develop through placing them in what's called a strange situation. So the therapist has an odd response to you as a patient that is outside of your normal pattern. So they don't respond in the same way, and therefore your brain has to adapt. Your personality.
We're the difference that makes the difference, I think, aren't we?
That's right. So then you get that personality adaptation, hopefully in a positive way. One of the other theories as well, I'm interested in what you think about this, is this idea of mirror neurons. How,
love a mirror neuron.
do you?
Yeah.
And how you know, the mirror so for people that don't know, mirror neurons are literally what they say on the tin. There are neurons in your brain that mirror somebody else's stuff. So as my hand is moving like this, the idea is that there are mirror neurons inside your head that are doing that hand movement as well. They're mirroring it, but they're also doing that psychologically and emotionally. So there's an idea that the mirror neurons are fired, and the processes in the mind of the therapist get mirrored in the mind of the patient.
Yeah. And that certainly works with, you know, a patient that I've discharged today, actually. You know, she said, probably shouldn't have even said she, sorry. So they said, you know, what I've liked most about you is that you're so non-judgmental, and I felt like I can bring anything to you and have you contain it and help me explain it and understand it. And, you know, it's been a very different experience than she's had. Sorry, it's really difficult. And then they've had elsewhere. And that's been so powerful. You know, it's allowed it to be the difference that made the difference. And, you know, they said at the time when we closed at the end of our last session today, actually, you know, I found myself thinking, well, what would Marianne say? So it's a sense of having internalized this other as a compassionate other, rather than the self-critic or, you know, some of the negative stuff they've had come in previously. And I think that will stay with that client, you know, forever now. That, you know, once they've internalized you and get used to actually doing thought balancing themselves and not being so mean to themselves, I think it's life-changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you any thoughts about whether those processes are as fully engaged with online as they are sort of face-to-face? Do you know of any sort of work or research that's ongoing on around that at the moment?
Any research about that?
It doesn't matter, I'm just interested.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've seen any, but I think it will be coming thick and fast, imminently. I think there's only 2 patients on my caseload currently who I've ever met in a room. The rest are all, you know, I've even picked up people and discharged them already that I've only ever met remotely. And so I think that perhaps, you know, there was a period of adjustment to getting used to people that I'm used to seeing in the room. And, you know, the fact that I have legs, everybody, you know, they've never seen those before.
They do things that my legs don't do. So you're definitely younger than me. There's no way my leg would do that anymore with a very horrible sound emanating.
I was up doing yoga at 6 a.m. this morning.
Well done you. Well done you.
Yeah, so, and the yoga teacher said he might tune in today as well. So hello, if you're watching. Yeah, I think it's just not been an issue for people who, you know, have signed up to therapy during the lockdown. Everything's remote. It hasn't been an issue. And some of the results that we've been able to achieve together, honestly, I'm getting a bit misty-eyed thinking about it. Honestly, it's been life-changing.
Good. And I think there's also, when I was doing the research, and it'd be interesting, you touched upon this a little bit, but the research is quite clear that those hard to reach groups of people are enfranchised by telehealth. So a good example of a hard to reach group of people would be single mums that are a bit worried about being seen going into the therapist in case that reflects upon them, and they're worried about sort of authorities getting involved and stuff like that, etc. Not that a professional would hide stuff from social services or anything, but it's a block, an emotional block they have. But certainly with telehealth models, that ability to work from home when you're a busy single parent, for example, and you can find that time rather than the sort of army experience of having to sort out the cover and get to a place, etc. Certainly that's enfranchising. It's also other hard to reach groups. We think about things like very high suicide rates amongst farmers who live in isolated rural areas. Doing telehealth sort of approaches with them was very successful in terms of reducing suicide rates. And also thinking about people with social phobias and social anxieties.
Absolutely.
And, you know, engaging with that.
Definitely.
People with all sorts of anxiety, depressive disorders as well. People not motivated to get out of bed. Now you can get into the room with them and all of that. So there was a lot of research around that. I think that was validating it. Is that your experience as well? So just thinking about, because you work in the
Yeah.
NHS. Yeah.
In the past, you know, very recently even, if we've got a referral for somebody that hasn't left their bedroom for, you know, 3 years, well, then we'll have to get the OTs in, the occupational therapists in first, to be able to get you to the clinic, because, you know, the psychologist isn't going to be able to keep coming out to see you at home, and so we can't set up a service that we can't fulfill. But now, you know, I've done assessments on the phone, so it was early lockdown, done assessments with a client, you know, on the telephone from their room, and that's, you know, that's fine. We were able to get a really good feel for what was going on. It worked well. So I think already, you know, we're thinking about keeping some element of remote clinics for the foreseeable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that this event we're only at the beginning of. We've got a couple more years to go of this stuff, and you know, we're going to manage it more effectively because we're out of the denial. We now know sort of much more about it. But certainly, you know, the sort of NHS trusts my companies are working with are still very clear that we're not having loads of patients coming in. It's remote working, it's remote team working, and it's also things like putting teams in bubbles so that they don't cross-infect, so that you have some resilience in your teams as well.
Yeah. Well, I watched a little bit of Stacey Dooley yesterday, was it? I'm not sure. The day before, I don't know when it was. Very recently, about in a maternity hospital during COVID, and actually some of the staff were saying, we've now realised we've been doing it wrong for years. You know, this is the way it needs to be. We need to be about limiting risk and minimising infection, and you know, so I think they're going to be very much keeping a lot of this even once the threat has passed. And it does make you think when you see someone shaking hands, or, you know, I've been watching a bit of Line of Duty with my husband lately, you know, and they're hugging each other, and, you know, and it's like, it's a bit like, it feels a bit otherworldly. It feels a bit like, you know, that before the smoking ban, you can see before and after 2007, people smoking in pubs and things. And it's a bit like, wow, that looks really weird.
Yes, it's odd stuff. And I think we don't know the full scope of the changes, but I think sort of times like this accelerate certain changes that would have taken maybe a decade or even a generation.
For sure.
I think there's significant changes. I also predicting significant changes in terms of workforce practices in general, and changes in terms of gender workforce practices. A lot of guys I've been sort of talking to have been feeding back to me how much they've enjoyed home working, because they've been able to spend more time with their families. And I don't
it's not always a good thing, though, but yeah.
Well, it's, I know.
I've played a lot of Ghostbusters. You know, I'm pretty much up to here with Ghostbusters and Power Rangers. But yeah,
it's very much a good thing as well. But you know, and I think one of those things is that you know, certainly the fathers that I'm talking to are sort of really questioning this idea of why would I go back? I'm not quite sure. Okay, I can go back part-time, but actually there's some real benefits for me in this. And that was a sort of gender patterning that was taking place anyway, slowly in the background.
With shared parental leave and things.
Massively accelerated, to be honest. And we're not going to go back. I want to come back to some of the questions.
Okay.
And there's a couple of questions. One is about PTSD, which we haven't got onto yet, so I'm not going to give you that question just yet.
Okay.
But there is a question about telehealth and teletherapy. And the question is, I'm not sure who it's from. It's my team member, Jennifer, has sent it through, but I'm not sure who actually asked this question. So if I'm not naming you, I apologise. It's not, I'm stealing the question from you. She just hasn't told me. So the question is, could teletherapy play a role in online schools, as many schools may be closed due to the pandemic? So thinking about telehealth and teletherapy and young people and children. And I guess let's segue into then as well questions about the impact of these times on sort of emotional and mental health function. I mean, I think with children in particular, there may be some big questions that we could begin to look at there, particularly as, you know, I think a lot of the narrative that's going on at the moment in terms of return to school are very much focused on the fears of the adults about infection. And infection isn't a fear for children. so much because it's not really affecting children.
Yeah.
So we hear the voice of the adults going, will the teachers be okay? So the unions saying, etc. Will the R rate stay below? But let's think about kids, shall we? And kids and telehealth. So, yeah. So in terms of the question itself, what role do you think teletherapy and telehealth can play in terms of working within the school system, for example?
Well, I think it can have a massive role. I think it allows schools to perhaps buy an hour of therapy and just have one client, whereas otherwise they might kind of feel like they've got to have a number of cases to be able to justify having a psychologist in or something like that. So it offers flexibility. It offers, kids are so good at technology, aren't they? They are natural. They're naturally our converts, aren't they? Because they accept everything on screens. Even my 4-year-old can swipe. But then that said, if someone of a school age does need, some sort of clinical input, then it's worth balancing whether actually what they need is something very human that feels very safe, and in a way that perhaps it might be harder to contain remotely. But I certainly think I think it's useful in all areas.
I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and wonder sort of what your thoughts are on this in terms of children, and because my feeling is that schools, because of social distance stuff like that, there's not going to be enough physical space. So we're going to see, as we're going to see in a lot of workplaces, a sort of mixed approach. So some kids joining in electronically and some being physically present.
Yeah.
I think that sort of, the thing about online schooling though, what it lacks is this sort of just general social play group experience, because it's structured learning, and structured learning is useful, but it's not the whole experience of being part of complex social groups, which is what I think schools give. And maybe this move online is going to be more complex, and maybe I'm thinking that's what you mean somehow by, oh no, actually we do need to have a human experience.
But we can always, if I want to right now, I can turn off my camera. I can mute myself, and that's a little harder to do. Whilst you do get clients who kind of might dissociate and become silent and absent, it's very much easier to work out what might be going on. You've got more body language in the room. So, like I said, my legs are here. I almost did it again. No, I didn't. You've got
show off, basically.
You've got more body to see, and then more body to ground. So what you can't do, you can't touch somebody. So I can't reach into your room now if you're dissociating. So I've got a little orange ball that I keep in my work bag. And if somebody starts to dissociate, and I can talk about what dissociation is as well, if that's helpful, you can just gently have a game of catch to get them back in the room. And I can't do that in the same way. So whilst I can say to you, well, let's do some deep breath. Let's breathe in through our nose. Let's just focus on what you can feel. Can you feel your bottom sitting on the seat? Can you feel your feet pressing on the floor? What can you smell? What can you hear? And you can kind of ground them that way. But, whilst we don't always touch patients, you can have a touch contract about actually, what are you comfortable with? So are you comfortable with me gently shaking your arm if I feel like actually, you're in a difficult place, or actually, no, that's not okay. I'm not okay with that. Just lob a ball at my head. That's fine.
Well, let's move the conversation sort of in the direction that it's going naturally, is to look at the sort of therapy and therapeutic techniques and these things, because, so dissociation, I think I know what that means, but why don't you explain what it means? And then also the difference and similarities between that and something like derealisation, because they're on a spectrum, those types.
Yeah. So
what are these things?
Yes. So if I could teach anything there's something to everybody, it would be to think about the window of tolerance. So what that is, but broadly speaking, it's knowing where we're at now. So you and I are probably ticking along in the middle zone. We're functional, we're doing all right. But if a tiger ran into the room, then we might find that we shoot up, our adrenaline levels would react, and it might become more panicked, it might become more fight and flight. So that might lead more to panic attack type syndrome, which would be at the red bits. We've got red at the top, yellow in the middle, like a cool dancer, but I'm not. And then blue at the bottom. So blue would be more spacey, more zoned out. We all, and that's sort of dissociative, we all dissociate from time to time. So when you're driving, you will not remember all of it because you just kind of focus on the bits that are important, but you'll be thinking about what you're going to have for tea or, you know, what you've got to do when you get home. But as soon as you need to, you can get your attention back in.
Yeah.
Dissociation can be a useful survival strategy when you need to stay somewhere physically, but mentally it's very difficult. So we see that with a lot of people who've been hurt by other people in the past.
Yeah. And what's the difference and similarities with something like derealisation, for example? Because I think a lot of people are experiencing derealisation.
Yeah, we were just talking about that a moment ago, weren't we? That you sort of have to have a moment to catch up with where you're at. So, you know, even wandering around supermarkets and seeing people wearing masks and thinking, gosh, you know, if this had been a year ago, I would have been, what's going on? Why is everyone wearing a mask? You know, you couldn't have imagined if somebody had said to you, you know, in a few months' time, everyone's going to be wearing masks and, you know, standing 2 meters apart to queue. And you're going to be queuing for over an hour to get into Asda. And you'll be like, no, I won't. I don't even want to go to Asda. But yes, you do, because you want to stock your cupboards full of butter beans. Like, you know, you have to have a moment to catch up and regroup. And I don't quite know where derealisation would be. Would that be blue? Probably, because you're a bit like taken aback, aren't you? You know, you can't quite get your head around it. But where derealisation, I think, is part of normal spectrum, it could become dissociation, couldn't it? So if you really were kind of finding it really difficult to connect to, and that triggered stuff from an earlier time in your life that also meant that actually it was quite scary, you know, watching people with masks. So if you'd been attacked by somebody in a balaclava, for example, then somebody in a black mask, because lots of them are sort of, you know, the elasticy reusable ones are black now, that might re-trigger you from thinking about a black balaclava or something like that, which might then trigger you to feeling quite scared, either panicked or dissociative.
And I think that, you know, these types of experiences are beginning to happen for quite a number of people. And it's linked to one of the questions that's come up, which is, so the question is, in light of this pandemic, it seems that we are all in a way going to be left with some exposure to traumatic experiences. And what are the tips and tools we can use to manage that we're moving forward in life to prevent PTSD? So to prevent the clinical disorder.
Bit of acceptance, Noel. Bit of acceptance and commitment therapy. And actually what we're doing is, you know, even today, so I was a little bit nervous about meeting you and coming on your fine show. And I used it in a case with a client that it cropped up to me as I was eating my breakfast. And actually what I could have done was like, oh, no, la, 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 let's not think about that. Let's just be, but what I thought was actually, this is quite a big deal. I don't usually do this, you know, I'm usually asleep by about 9:30. So this is outside of my comfort zone. So so what I did was I just took a moment to hold it at a distance that was comfortable. So I'm not going to do it here because that would feel oppressive. I'm not going to do it right the way over there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that at a middle distance and I'm going to just take a few breaths in on it and a few breaths out on it and just mentally hold it and get used to the idea that I can tolerate that thought. And that is what I do. You know, I practice what I preach. And we all need to be thinking about trying to do that to be able to cope with these really difficult times. Avoiding it is not going to make a difference because you still, you know, especially when you couldn't get the shopping slots, you still need to actually have the skills and the tools to be able to go to the shop and pick up that food for yourself.
So tell me why avoidance doesn't work. Explain that, because I think it's a really interesting idea. It works in terms of the initial reduction in anxiety or fear about something. So it's very seductive, I think. But why doesn't it work?
It is. Well, it doesn't work because we've got something called a safety-seeking behaviour, so an SSB. So I'm going to draw a little thing on your screen. So we've got our XY axis. So this bit here is stress and anxiety. This bit here is time. So something happens and you'd react to it naturally. So if that tiger leaps in the room, you react to it. And actually what I might do is buy myself a tiger-proof door. That would probably work pretty well, wouldn't it? But actually, what if I start to then think, well, I'm not even going to open my window. So I'm going to keep all my windows shut in case that tiger gets in. Then what I've done is I've employed my safety-seeking behaviour when I start to get a bit worried about tigers. But actually, before too long, I think, well, that's not going to work. I'm going to need to not open any windows or any doors ever.
Yeah.
And before you know it, I'm just living as a complete hermit in my bedroom because that feels like the safest place. And I'm not allowing myself to experience any kind of distress or anything at all. And what I'm thinking wrongly is that actually keeping all those windows and keeping all those doors shut has kept me safe from tigers. And actually, the bit that I haven't thought about is actually that was a freak accident when that tiger got out. That doesn't happen all the time. And actually, I can learn to feel safe again and to know that actually tigers jumping through houses and coming for tea, whatever, is really very rare.
This is somehow seems to be connected with that concept of distress tolerance.
Oh, it definitely
the
is.
Capacity to deal with, tolerate distress.
Yeah.
I mean, there's I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who's sort of credited as being the father of behavioral psychology. He said something like this, which is, I think, what you're talking about. We're afraid of the bear because we run away from it. We don't run away from the bear because we're afraid of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I've used that even in myself. So with grief, I'm not sure if you're aware. I hope you haven't had experience of it, but it's human. We often all have. To begin with, I wouldn't find it very easy to think about, my dad. But actually, I do that myself now. So I think about him purposefully. I can see him right now. He's up there on the shelf, and I can connect to that. Hi. I can connect to that it's a photo of him. It's nice. It's not anything weird. But I can connect to that in a way that feels manageable without it being derailing. Whereas in the past, certainly early on when I was in client sessions with people, in order to not completely lose the plot, I'd have to push that away. But now, I feel more comfortable. I'm a better psychologist because of it. But I wish it had never happened. I'm more comfortable to bring that into the room, not with being overly massively sharey. That's not what it's about, but to kind of think about similar experiences and to respond as a human first. And I can think about him in a way that's not derailing and in a way that feels like I'm now really glad that he was my dad.
Yeah. Whereas if you'd done that safety-seeking behaviour, you'd have made it more and more difficult to think about.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to have his photo on my shelf.
Exactly.
Because that would be triggering.
And I think the point about that, sort of just to underline it, is that behaviour ultimately leads to you losing a lot of things. And that's why avoidance long-term is not a good idea.
Yeah.
It's great initially like you say, at the extreme, in the moment when it's happening, whatever that event is, and denial, numbness and all that sort of stuff is a very important defense in the overwhelm of grief, for example. I have experienced that. I remember when my mum died, and I was very grateful that my body just shut down for a while. So I had to organise the funeral, I had to do all sorts of things, and there's no way I would have done that. But then the feelings came back online, and they're pretty crappy. And yes, I did all of that thing of I don't want to feel this, and now I can talk about it. It's okay. I'm not overwhelmed by it, so I can still feel a little prickle in the back of my eye. That's all right. That's fine. But yes, I had to do that thing of facing it, which is that thing you said about acceptance. So this morning you have slight anxiety. I'm going on this weird show with this weird bloke. No, I don't know him. That's a bit weird.
What's he going to be like? Is he going to be mean to me? I was fairly confident not. But, we are natural scientists, aren't we? Our brain will throw us all manner of things that aren't going to happen. But because we just are naturally planning things, I can know what happens if I throw this remote control. And, we're naturally always planning and always predicting and always thinking about things.
Yeah. And so this acceptance thing, let's think about acceptance, because you talked about acceptance and commitment therapy, and sort of explain what that means. What is ACT? So that
okay, I'm not massively qualified or experienced in ACT, but what I understand of it is it's part of taking control, and sort of choosing to respond in a way that that just makes sense, and isn't derailing. And being able to sort of sit alongside your problems. So it's not that it's like I said, it's not like it's overwhelming. It's not like it's here, but we can learn to become more accepting and more tolerant of actually the thing that really terrifies us, just being here, because it's here anyway. With anxiety, it's always there, but by running away from it, it's not doing us a service. And so we might as well find a way to find, you know, to allow it to be in our lives. So even things with like depression, you know, we have an ebb and flow in our lives. You know, we're always somewhere on that kind of, you know, where we're at with our mood, and we hope that it doesn't stay low for too long. But
depression,
we've got
I think,
to
is
be...
a really good. I think depression is a really good example, because it's one of those things that it's very difficult to accept because it feels so crushing. Anxiety as well, I think, but let's think about it. And I think about my own personal struggles with anxiety and depression. I remember a therapist I worked with, and I, you know, I sort of, again, trying to fight off the feelings of depression because I didn't want them. They were uncomfortable and painful, and also I catastrophized them and thought that, you know, it would mean I was stuck. I wouldn't be able to move, wouldn't be able to do anything. Ignoring the reality of I was sitting talking to somebody about it. So there you go. And he said, you know, you just have to come to terms with the fact, and you have to deal with the fact that you are a depressed person now. Stop fighting that. And that was like the most difficult thing that anybody could have said to me.
It's like relaxing into quicksand. It feels like the opposite thing of what you should do.
Are you insane? Of course I can't accept that. And I think I said something like that too. But he was absolutely right. But I did have to accept it to be able to work with it and work through it. And then move on to the sort of strategies I needed to manage it more effectively.
Yeah.
But as I was fighting it off, as I was cognitively defended against it, I couldn't even imagine things I needed to do to go through it and come through the other side.
There's an example of somebody I saw, I think it was yesterday, who in the past has been quite unwell, and medical retirement has been discussed as a sort of an early exit from work. And in the past that felt really like a threat, you know, really something that was very oppressive. And yesterday I said, well, you know, what would that look like? You know, what would the pension be like? How much would that be? And that wasn't something that had ever been researched or investigated because it felt too threatening. But actually, what about if we look at that objectively and just see what it would look like? So we're not judging it. We're not saying we're definitely going for it, but we're knowing our enemy, aren't we? You know, we're knowing, and actually that might give us choices. So it might not be as bad as we feared. And actually, if we can take control of that, rather than that being something that's done to us, it's something we're choosing to do because it's actually all right. It's actually not as bad as I feared.
And thinking about it and thinking about the question as well, and sort of guiding us into that, and thinking about strategies and ways that people can work with this situation. So acceptance is one of them. I think it's really crucial at the moment. In acceptance, I would say also people have to accept that this is a dangerous, difficult situation that we're in. There's no two ways about it, you know.
It is.
50,000 people have died in 12, 13 weeks. That's sort of apocalypse
big
death.
Yeah, that's big.
Apocalypse level. That's Blitz, London Blitz level death.
And anybody who's watching this who has lost somebody through this, you know, my sympathies. That's, you know, like both of us get it. You know, we've lost people through grief, but I'm very aware that actually it was so important to me to be able to visit my dad in the hospice and to be able to go and sort of see him for weeks and weeks. And without having that opportunity, that would, you know, trusting other people to take care of the people you love most, that's incredibly difficult. And I think we're going to have some certainly vicarious traumatization to deal with because of that.
Yeah, without doubt. And I think the loss of those rituals, which are really important in the grieving process, as you know, because the health requirements. It was very similar in some ways. It reminded me a little bit of when in the early days of HIV/AIDS, and the fear around that, and sort of people not turning up to funerals. I remember, like, a close friend of mine we found dead at home, and the ambulance crew and various medical professionals not wanting to touch the body, and stuff like that, because of this fear of whatever it was. Not criticism; it's just the reality.
Yeah. Well, until we know about things, you know, they are naturally feeling kind of quite intimidating and quite unclear.
Without a doubt. And I just sort of the loss of those, the ability to go to the funeral, as you say, and sort of, you know, be at somebody's side when you want to, because they're dying, etc. I was saying to a colleague that I think that one of the things that is necessary and is going to happen through this experience is that we're going to have to find group public ways of dealing with this grief, because it's been so big.
That's an idea.
you know, and in similar ways that, you know, we had the response to, so I'm in Hackney, and which is part of London, it's not far from Bethnal Green, where there was an awful tragedy, Bethnal Green tube station during World War II, where people got killed by a bomb going down the entrance, and it was just a dreadful thing that happened. And you know, it's part of the local culture there that people understand this, and it's part of the grieving that people in Bethnal Green at the time engaged with. And I think we're going to have some.
I guess similarly to Coventry, we're now the city of peace and reconciliation, aren't we?
Exactly. My feeling is that there's going to have to be some move, this public move towards recognising that what the deaths that happened during this time have a unique place,
absolutely,
in our experience because of what's happened. And I think, you know, that will come. We're still in it, so it's different what that looks like. But I think this whole thing around grief, and grief is one of the areas that, or loss, I think, is one of the areas that you've worked in quite a lot, I believe, or is it?
Not really. I mean, no.
Personal story.
It runs through everything, doesn't it? You know,
I think
so much is about grief. Whether that's grief from the life you could have had X, Y, and Z not happened, or just such sad stories. You know, I'm a big fan of the ACE scale, so Adverse Childhood Life Experiences scale, to think about, you know, what difficulties people have been through. But there's so much grief in that. You know, had you been born to somebody that wanted to nourish you and cherish you and just think that you were the most special thing, then, you know, you wouldn't have fallen into the way of X, Y, and Z, and this wouldn't have happened. And actually, there's evidence that you wouldn't have then turned to drugs and wouldn't be obese and wouldn't smoke. You know, there's such clear evidence, and so there's so much grief there. So it runs through, I think, all of my clinical work. So am I a grief expert? Yes, I guess I am. But am I better? Am I a more human grief expert for having lost my dad? Yes, I am.
Yeah, not that any of us wanted that to happen.
No.
Sort of the point at which I got very guilty about recognising that with my mum's death, I'd gained a lot. That was quite a weird experience.
Yeah.
I go, oh, I might be betraying her, but it's not. It's the truth is, I wouldn't be who I am now without that experience.
No, I wouldn't either. Even that I was left some inheritance, and I thought, well, Dad had always supported me with my career. You know, he was interested in that, and you know, he'd funded part of I only did 1 year of my master's because I then got on my doctorate, but you know, he'd wanted to support that, and he wanted me to, not because he wanted to be able to say his daughter was a doctor, you know, he didn't. He wanted me to be happy. And so he wanted to support that as a dream. So he'd sort of helped support funding my master's. But when he passed, he left me some money, and I thought, well, I don't really know what to do with that. And then I thought, well, I'm going to continue to use it for my career. So I trained in EMDR, so I self-funded to do that, which then led me to kind of doing some CFT stuff. And it's really changed. It's really changed my confidence in being with people. You know, I feel like the doctorate course is kind of they create really, really highly skilled psychologists, but the theory is that you become a band 7 psychologist, and then you go off to your first paid post to go and get your specialist training. But there's just not the money for that training that there once was. And so I was feeling like actually I never quite got the extra bit that was going to make me feel less of an imposter, so less of that imposter syndrome. But losing my dad allowed me to have some money that I hadn't, you know, I didn't feel like I needed to account for. Do you know what I mean? I didn't have so much guilt in spending on myself, but also, you know, should I have had to self-fund for stuff that was going to be used for NHS patients? I don't know. But has it been really beneficial for me as a person, as a clinician, and benefited my private practice? Yes, indefinitely. So I would never have wanted to benefit in that way, but it's been life-changing for me.
But I think that's, I mean, if you don't mind me commenting on the story, and I think that coming back to the question about how do we manage this situation, I think one of the things is to look at how we think about adverse experiences, and you know, losing a loved one is an adverse experience.
Sure is.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
But we can choose in some ways. We have a choice to make about that when we go through a natural process of grieving, and I think grieving is a natural process. And then we come out the other side, and we've got decisions to make about that experience, about whether we sort of let it bring us down or whether we do something with it and transform it. And it sounds like you made a decision to transform the experience.
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, I thought I was never gonna ever want to do anything that I wouldn't be able to tell my dad about. You know what I mean? I'd never, so I haven't moved house since it happened, but it was along my mind that, well, I'm going to be here forever now. This is going to be it, you know. I'm never gonna have any other children. I'm never gonna do anything that, you know, that he wouldn't have known about. I'm not going to change jobs because that would feel weird. But before you know it, I think it's part of that acceptance, part of my life moving on in a different way, that I felt I was able to. So EMDR sort of helped me process some of the grief stuff as well. So even learning EMDR was helpful for shifting me on, which gave me, you know, an excitement how powerful it can be, how much it could work for other people. So now I'm, you know,
I think
I've
one of the
walked
gifts
the walk.
we get as professional healers, one of the gifts we get is the training and
Mm,
the positive impact it has upon ourselves.
definitely.
I mean, there wasn't a lot, I think, that I would agree with Freud these days, but one of the things he did say was the need for healers to have an experience of being healed, if you like.
Yeah, we're all wounded healers, aren't
Yeah,
we?
quite. So, I mean, I think that's, you know, that's right. That allowing life experiencing, which is what we're talking about. I'm going to bring us more into discussing trauma, and because it's a word that we've been using, and I wonder if you don't mind just saying what would you say trauma is, so that
Okay.
we get
Okay,
some idea of
certainly.
what it is that we're
So
talking.
for me, the way I explain it to people is it's a sense of something from then that is making you react or making it feel like it's happening in the now.
Right.
And it's kind of like, it's a time lag, because when we're really scared by something or something's really difficult, kind of the top part of our brain, I can show you, let me show you a little brain.
Yeah.
So the top part of our brain is offline. I'm not going to find my bits now. Talk amongst yourselves.
I've got a brain here. But
Have you? Here we go. So we've got our brain. So we've got our reptilian bit at the bottom, we've got our mammalian bit in the middle, and we've got our human brain on top. But what happens under fight and flight? I've got one here. What happens under fight or flight conditions is that it's just our reptilian brain. It's the bit that kind of keeps us safe. It's the bit that's our fight or flight that's online. So the bit that can tell us, oh, it's all right. Don't worry, that's just a plastic bag wrapped around a lamppost. That's not a man standing by the road waving a knife at you. That's not online. So you react as if it is that man with the knife because you're pattern matching. But if that had previously happened to you, there had been a man standing by the roadside, then, you know, that bit of the brain wouldn't have kind of time and date stamped it, if you like. So at any point that you see anything that could be something that's difficult or scary, it feels like actually the way that you felt then, the way that you felt really scared and that you felt very unsafe and that it was all happening now, it feels like it's now because the bit about time and date stamping wasn't online at the time. Does that make sense? So yeah, actually what we do with trauma therapy is we encourage people to have sort of one foot in the present and one foot in the past in a way that feels safe, so we can do some of that acceptance, so we can have this right next to us and feel like that's okay. Okay, I know actually, oh, that's not now. Right. And people say that to me. You know, so people say that to me at the end of a session. They're like, oh, right. Yeah, that was, you know, when I got shot at in, you know, in Beirut or whatever, that, you know, that was 8 years ago. That wasn't now, you know, and that you see that shift within 50 minutes. It's so incredibly powerful. And then from that moment, they know that that's not now. So they can still look at that and go, oh, God, that was really difficult. I do remember that being really scary, being in that Jeep when we were being shot at from the ditch. That was really difficult. But you can do that in the way that I can look at my dad and know that that's not December 2017 now.
Yeah.
And so I've assimilated my reaction to that.
Amazing. A really, really evocative explanation, because I think that is the thing, that a traumatic experience then presents itself and repeats, and we're right in the repetition of it, and we can't make those. I remember working with kids who've been traumatized in kids' company, and they would be engaged in violent acts, but what they were remembering were sort of abusive things that happened to them as children. They had no memory at all. Current day violent acts.
Yeah.
When they were in the flashback, as we would call it. So is that a term you would use, a flashback?
Intrusive thoughts. So a flashback would be, when you think it's now. that's less common, I would say, but certainly does happen sometimes. That comes with sort of dissociation as well. Intrusive thoughts and sort of, disruptive thoughts would be more commonly thought about, but flashbacks, that's certainly something people come to me with. And then when we think about it, and we think actually what a flashback is like you said, they think it's now. Actually, it feels like that is in the room and you're fighting someone, and that feels like you're fighting that person. When we think about that, they go, yeah, well, that does happen sometimes, but actually what I'm struggling with is all the memories, all the triggers. So because we are humans, we can be triggered by thoughts of something. If I say to people quite often, if you hear somebody on the phone and they're saying, they say, hi, Dad, immediately I'm then thinking, oh, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Like, they get to speak to their dad on the phone, and I'm triggered by someone else I don't even know, just because of language, because we as humans have language.
And then it sounds to me like what you're talking about is that trauma isn't so much the event, but it's how we respond to
absolutely.
it. I think there is a sort of common misconception that trauma is, I was a soldier and somebody shot at me, or I was in a car crash. It's that thing.
It's the meaning you take from that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, say more about that.
Yeah. So my supervisor in the NHS, I'm going to borrow her words, so these are yours, Claire.
Yeah, good.
She would say that, at the point where this top bit goes offline, the bit that's left is the self-referencing part, the bit that says I am. So I am at risk, I am at danger, I am vulnerable, I am scared, I am not coping well. So it's the I am, it's that self-referencing. That bit stays online. So all you can do is to kind of work out your proximity to that. So I am too close to this makes me feel scared. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if we were able to calmly reconnect to that, you could think, well, I am aware that tigers are dangerous, but I am also aware that actually this one is, this one's chained up. This is probably going to be okay. I can probably allow myself to sit and stroke its tail or its foot. Do you know what I mean? And I can actually feel more at ease in the presence of that.
Do you think during the times that we're in, it's sort of a leading question because I think I know what the answer is going to be, but are we going to see a rise in trauma symptoms? Because that's what we're talking about. It's that it's the symptoms that we're diagnosing, not the event.
My fear when all this first started happening was that we were going to have a massive spike in OCD, and I think that probably is around. So certainly when my kids were at school, they'd be coming home and say, we need to wash our hands, mummy, and they were talking about COVID, and almost like it was a tangible thing that you could see, and because I think they had to almost externalize COVID to be able to get kids' heads around it. But trauma's everywhere. So I think if we can normalize trauma, and perhaps this chat today will be really helpful for that. So one of my patients I just discharged recently, when I first did the assessment with them, I said, it sounds like actually there's quite a few traumas that have gone on for you. And the client was like, no, it's not that bad. No, I haven't had any traumas. And then towards the end of our session, we had a couple of sessions left. She was like, I've realized actually that in that first session, you were right. This has been really traumatic. But trauma almost feels like it should be something enormous. And sometimes it is, unfortunately.
Well, sometimes it is. But I mean, as you know, mostly trauma is something that happens all over a long period of time. It can. Let's not get into DSM-5 and diagnostic procedures.
I don't think that'd be very good to listen to.
But no, thinking about this word normalization. So we had this word acceptance. That's a really important word, really important concept. Normalizing is something that in psychological therapies we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
Why is normalizing such a sort of, like we talk about boundaries a lot. This is boundaries. Normalizing is another one of those words that's used all the time. What does that mean?
Well, nobody likes to be different, do they really? In terms of our mammalian kind of behaviours, being different can mean that you get cast out. Being different can make you feel like a real social threat. So you're more likely to be talked about. You're more likely to be, thought about someone as being a bit odd. That's not a comfortable position for us to be in, and validating is so important as well. So, I guess if people are watching this and thinking that before today, they wouldn't want to see a psychotherapist or a psychologist, because that's for people that are really, really struggling, and I don't think they're proper humans, they're not. And so normalizing that actually you and I are both humans and seem all right, that maybe wouldn't be such a scary prospect.
And hearing, say, maybe both of us talk about that, well, I've experienced trauma, I've experienced depression, anxiety, grief, etc. You've experienced some things as well. You've experienced grief, you've certainly experienced trauma from that. Because because you're not. It's a very traumatic event. It's a real traumatic loss. And again, that's part of normalizing as well. There's another thing I think, and sort of around normalization, which I think is really important, which is this thing about when somebody's isolated in their clinical condition, the clinical condition takes over the whole of them. And it's very difficult then for that person to rejoin the human race and get the sort of natural everyday healing that you get from social connection. It's a sort of that sense of I'm cut off.
It's like the I had a black dog thing, isn't it? When you see that iconic image of the dog sort of almost filling up every ounce of that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that sort of victimized state, then very difficult to sort of feel that things can change. And I think normalizing can mean that we reduce the extreme responses. And some people are resistant to normalization. I think in my practice, I hear those like, no, I'm not like that. I am. It's much more worse in me. And sometimes it's quite a struggle to get people into much more normalized state. But actually what it does is what you say, just creates this connection.
That's what I like about compassion focused therapy, because it really boils down. So the bit I've been showing you is the tricky brain stuff that I would do to really boil down, just how none of this is our fault, that we've got these brains that work in the way that they do. And that levels us somewhat. All of us would be triggered by thoughts, would be triggered by sounds, would be triggered by smells, would be triggered by sensations, by a felt sense of something. And that's not our fault. It's not our fault that actually we have these impulsive thoughts, that we have these, really derailing things that happen to us, that we find that ourselves judging our impulsive thoughts. So, I've been a new mother twice. I've got 2 babies, and it's really common that people will have impulsive thoughts about their babies, because that's what our brains do. And we're also problem solvers. So if there's a screaming baby, it's really annoying. And so our brain might up the ante, but
might say, throw it out the window.
Yeah, but these impulsive, intrusive thoughts don't mean that you actually want to do the action. Whereas when we misinterpret that, we overemphasize it, because the idea of, dropping our child down the stairs or something is horrifying to us. Because we really don't want that to be true. But, the fact that I've thought about that, perhaps that means I want that to happen. And before you know it, you're not carrying the car seat down the stairs at all. You're asking your husband to do it, or you're just not taking the child upstairs at all, and you're living just downstairs or just upstairs. And because of the overemphasis of what that impulsive thought means, it's the action that you take, the meaning you take, and then how it informs your action.
So it's that what the compassion in compassion focused therapy is. It's about understanding those internal processes and letting yourself off the hook. So
it's not really letting yourself off the hook. You're still off the hook because you're still accountable. So you can't, if things have happened, even it's got its utility in forensic services as well. So it would help explain how it was more likely that you were going to end up in that kind of situation. So they can understand more and be less self-critical. So there's been lots of criticism lobbied at people.
So that people understand, forensic means criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Forensic psychology and psychotherapy is working with what we call offender patients. So people have committed some sort of crime, usually crime of violence or rape or something, and have been determined by the courts that they need treatment because of some sort of identified disorder. As opposed to going to prison. So just as a segue, the point you're making about it working in offenders, you're picking up on my point about letting people off the hook in a sense. So you're saying it doesn't do that.
No, it doesn't do that. You're still accountable, but you can look at things compassionately. So many, there's a really powerful exercise that Chris Irons and Paul Gilbert have sort of taught me, and that is thinking about mapping out your self-critic. And it's a really powerful exercise. I don't know if you've done it yourself, but what your self-critic wants from you, what it wants you to do, when it, how it'll be happy when you look like this and that, when you're doing that, and what it actually says to you, and what it makes you feel like when it says that to you, and how it feels when you feel like that, and actually how it's made you feel to think about all of that. So that probably takes about 20 minutes to do that, and it's really powerful because you think, well, actually, if somebody was sitting on my shoulder, and you also imagine what it looks like, so you can kind of imagine it as something that's like, for me, it's an orc from Lord of the Rings. It's something really not nice, you know. And the thought that I was carrying around, the orc's not really there with me anymore since I've learned more about this. But the orc was there, sort of telling me awful things about yourself. You know, who are you to be doing this? You know, the orc would have been going, who are you to be doing this with Noel? You know, you're going to be really boring. You are going to be really, people aren't going to like you. Nobody's going to take you in. You know, all of that, all the really awful things we think about ourselves. But actually what you do then is you do the compassionate map. So you think about actually what the compassionate self would want. And that's exactly what my client who I mentioned earlier has internalized me as. So she's kind of borrowed me as her compassionate other. Well, what would the compassionate other say about that? And you can kind of
add another level, maybe, or another framing on that. Again, because my background's in forensic work. I think I told you. So I spent about 10 years working forensic settings.
Right.
Fascinating work. I was really lucky. I did exactly what, because I'm old enough, I got my training. And what they said to me in my training was, and now go and find an NHS team to be part of and learn how to do the job properly.
Right.
What I did, and those teams existed back in the days when dinosaurs walked the earth with me. And one of the teams I got involved in, one of the services, was the forensic service, which was an extraordinary learning experience. One of the things I learned early in that, and this is more about psychodynamic speak, which is we don't need to get into, but there's this idea of the mind being constituted of certain elements. So the ego, superego, id, which roughly equates to internal parent, internal adult, internal child. That's how it. These are not physical structures in the brain, they're metaphors for how we process information. And a harsh superego, the internal critic, as you're talking. So Freud had this idea, and again, I'm not going to get into all the Freud stuff, but he had this idea that a weak superego was what led to criminality. And so you need to have a tighter, harsher superego.
Right.
And then later, you know, Klein in particular turned around and said that's nonsense. If you've got a harsh superego, you're more likely to act out.
Right.
In antisocial ways. And we know that that's the truth. And that's what we're talking about here, is that when people have that really harsh internal sense of self, their actions in the world are more likely to be antisocial. And this is where compassion focused therapy wasn't around when I was practicing in those days, but we were trying to work with that idea of a more socialized internal sense of self, a sense of self that was more connected with people and more socially available, and in essence more compassionate, because that made somebody safer. It was that simple. They were less likely to commit atrocious acts if they felt more connected to other human beings. And the way we feel connected, and we know the neuroscience of it now, is because this bit of the brain, the top bit, works really well socially, particularly when certain types of hormones are produced, such as oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. Some people call it the love hormone. But that makes us feel really connected. And the more we feel connected, the less likely we are to be shits. It's really simple. It's really from a neuroscience perspective, and that's what makes us sort of, you know, really effective. I want to come on to the EMDR, because I know you're also an expert in EMDR. And this
I'm an expert, but imposter syndrome struck.
Yes, you are. I'm going to hold on to that. I'm going to hold that back. Yes, you are. That's me being horrible to you, forcing you to accept.
Thanks. I'll put it here and I'll breathe on it.
You breathe. You get close to that. So EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
That's right.
Such a mouthful. What on earth is it? Okay,
so it's using bilateral stimulation. So what that means is both sides of the brain. So bilateral too. So you've got two sides of the brain. So when I move my right arm, it's the left-hand side of my brain that did that, and vice versa with the right. So what we've got two of is we've got two eyes. And certainly at the moment with remote stuff, we're using legs or we're using shoulders. So when I'm doing that, when I'm thinking about something with a half sort of present in the now and half in the past, and if I'm doing something like so it doesn't translate very well on remote, but eye contact stuff, so you'd be following my gaze like that. And so in person that works really nicely, and that's supposed to be the most powerful modality. But
I know on the computer screens they've got this purple ball, haven't they, which you can use.
Yeah, I've never used a light thing, and ironically it's because I really like the connectedness to somebody. I really like sitting, because you sit quite uncomfortably close in EMDR. So you'd sit with your chairs sort of, your knees would almost be touching, so facing each other but quite close, so much closer than you would in a typical situation, which can itself with trauma be difficult at times. But you don't launch straight into it. You've got a relationship by then, and they trust you, and it feels okay. You know, you move back again when you're not doing it. But so yeah, you do the eye movements, or during COVID times, or somewhat, you know, you do the taps, or they tap their legs, and they can even watch it as well, so they're getting that. But what they're doing, you know, we don't really know why it works. Maybe because it helps you to distance yourself slightly from it, so that it feels less now, and it feels like you've got kind of some shared attention going on. But it does work. You know, thinking about those difficult thoughts and having breaks. So you don't do it continually. So I would do a 50-minute session, but lots of my colleagues would say they'd only ever do it in a 90-minute session. But for me, 50 minutes works, and for my clients, 50 minutes works. And what you're doing is you're trying, because with trauma, you don't go A, B, C, D, E. What goes, you know, you go R, Z, you know, B. It's not sequential. So what the EMDR
it's almost like
does,
a psychotic fracturing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's not an integrated experience.
No.
Some of them are like the recovered memories and stuff like that, are whole experiences, but mostly, I mean, what people know, what trauma does is it really messes up the brain's ability to process an event. Yeah. Which we call memory. We call those events process. We sleep on them, we have REM, non-REM. We create a memory. And memories aren't like a memory stick, you know. I mean, most people think of memory in this metaphor as like it's in a particular place, like a memory stick in our brain, but it's not. Our brains, the way it does memory is the smell bit goes one place, and goes another bit, and then the language bit goes another bit, and then it builds connections between them, so you have the experience available. And what trauma does is it smashes in that capacity to work in that way, the brain, essentially.
But then also what fires together wires together. So if you keep having the same experience and the same reaction, then that neural pathway between that sound and that reaction and that memory is going to be strengthened, and so that almost keeps it going as well.
And then that isn't the process memory in a sense, is it? That's held memory. So because one of the most important things I think about memory is the ability to forget. Because we remember everything, we just go bonkers. And so we need a retrieval system so we can remember. But an important part of that remembering is we've forgotten. You know, we need that, I think.
What's really powerful about EMDR for me is that with trauma you become very much more focused. So you're like this, you can only see that. And what happens during an EMDR session is that it allows people to kind of move back, and they'll suddenly go, oh, I realised actually there was tiles on the wall in that room that I was in, and they had flowers on them, or there was a wallpaper, and actually, you know, I could see his shoes. I've not ever thought about his shoes at all. Do you know what I mean? They've just thought about the worst part of the trauma because they've been so zoned in on it. But it allows them to
talk about that. I mean, that came up. I'm thinking about the hearings for the judge in America, and the academic, female academic, who was a psychologist, who talked about how she'd been experienced from this guy and his mates, that really unfortunate rape experience in college. And a lot of people talked about how, well, she seems to remember bits of it, but all the rest of it is very vague. That is really, really common in trauma.
Yeah.
It's
really common.
Exactly what you're describing.
But then they judge themselves. Why can't I remember that? And then other people are reinforcing that. You know, if this was really that bad, then you'd remember.
Yeah, and it's because of that thing in trauma, isn't it, where we get a very narrow focus on certain aspects of that experience, which is considered to be the most dangerous aspect of the experience. some ways.
Yeah.
And also, I think also because it's also, there was a brilliant, I've seen 2 films that I think are superb depictions of what happens with memory and metaphor and image in trauma. And I can't remember the names of them. It doesn't really matter.
Good story, Noel.
The one was a guy who'd been classic sort of PTSD. He was a soldier, and he kept having this disturbing memory of roses, just flowers. And for some reason, he couldn't understand why this dream disturbed him so much. And there were these beautiful roses, and they showed this image, and you just thought, that's so beautiful. Look, a kaleidoscope of roses. And actually, what his mind had done, what his brain had done, was it was masking the real image was of his friend exploding.
Right. That's
And so
horrifying.
when he did the trauma work, he then recovered that memory, and he was just, he couldn't face that memory. That's the avoidance thing and the protection, all that sort of stuff. And it's
Very
extraordinary
powerful.
how the brain works to protect us. But of course, because it was trauma, it wasn't processed, and therefore he had to go through that experience and recover the memory, as you say, and then be able to.
And he didn't know why he was so distressed by these roses. You know, roses should be a nice thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just his brain protecting him. The other was of a woman who would see, and we didn't see this at the beginning of the film. We knew later on in the film why, but she was on a subway platform and she saw a guy in white sort of float out and walk out in front of the train and seemed to be floating and flying, and then she would see him at other times. And actually what had happened was that it was her rapist.
Right.
And again, that she had gone into this disassociated, traumatized state and transformed them into that image. And the reason she transformed this image was because she was Catholic and she was pregnant from the rape.
Right.
And her mind decided she was Mother Teresa, the Virgin Mary, and this was Jesus. And it was, again, I mean, I think both those films were extraordinary in describing what happens with memory and experience in trauma. And I guess you've come across those types of experiences in the work that you've done, where people come in and they think they're completely bonkers because they're having these really odd experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then working with people, you do this bilateral stimulation, and then that helps people in terms of getting hold of the real event and then processing it.
Yeah, just sticking with it really in a way that is controlled. So you're always safe. You know, I'm always keeping them safe and reminding them to breathe and, you know, grounding them if that needs to happen. But, you know, that they can go from A to Z. So even with trauma, you know, you might just do the grim bit, the grisly bit, but you don't get to the bit where you got home again and you were safe. And that's really important in processing trauma. You know, it's really important that you finish the story and you finish the bit where actually, well, you were okay, weren't you? You know, and again, quoting Claire, she said, there's, you know, actually sometimes even in difficult situations, there's things that were better about it. So even in the worst moment of my life, you know, I quite like the fact that when I was with my dad, I was wearing my new blue jeans. I really liked them, you know, and actually, do you know what I mean? There's elements of it. And actually, I had an amazing, really great prawn and rocket subway roll thing, sub roll in the hospice cafe the day before my dad died. And I, you know, that was really good, but it was one of the worst days of my life. But even within that, there's bits that were actually better and manageable and that actually, you know, weren't so bad.
Yeah. And we've begun to touch on it, but I'm just aware of time and I wanted to give
of course.
Talk about the tricky brain, which is a product that
it is.
you've begun to talk to us about.
I have.
And I think, you know, it's really important that we get, I think it's really important that people get to understand what this is, because our brains are tricky.
They certainly are.
And the more we can understand that, the more we can sort of begin to, you know, accept ourselves and normalize and have compassion for ourselves and understand that this is just what happens. That So tell us a bit about the tricky brain, what it is.
Okay.
How did it come about? What is it designed to do?
Yeah, okay. So it came about just as a realization, actually, as I was learning the theory about tricky brain, and it's called the triune brain sort of concept, that we've got those three sort of areas of our brain, so the reptilian, the mammalian, and the human.
Sure.
I thought this would be a really wicked kit. You know, this I just could imagine it as a kit. And so my assistant colleague at the time helped me to sort of knock one up, and people really liked it. And I thought, one day I just woke up and I thought, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna bring it to market. I'm gonna have it professionally made, and here it is.
Great.
Yeah. So launched it.
What's in the bag?
So what's in the bag? So we've got, I can't do it on the sofa, unfortunately. It does work for remote therapy, but it doesn't work so well on the sofa. So there's like a mat.
Right.
There's our tricky brain, and you'd lay that out on the table. So in person with somebody, you'd lay it out between you, or on remote therapy, you can lay it out and sort of angle the camera so that they can see both you and it. And then you'd go through popping the reptilian bit down, and you'd say, you know, this is why it's so difficult. And you'd think about the different functions of that reptilian brain, which is basically just to keep us alive, really. You know, so you know, heart rate and breathing, and you know, reproduction and all of that. And then you'd go on to thinking about actually the mammalian parts, and actually the bits, like I said, about living together and dominance and hierarchy, and kind of doing what you're told. And you know, even the fact that we've got sleep and wake cycles. You know, I'm usually asleep by now, so I'm an early bird, but other people would be night owls, and that would give us a stronger chance of survival. That's why, you know, living in groups makes us more likely to survive. So you go through all the mammalian things, because we're still humans, we're still mammals, we're still reptiles when it matters, when it counts. And we've got our human functions, which is supposed to make it all better. But actually, you go through sort of the 8 or 9 functions, you know, like memories and nightmares and dreams, and, you know, intrusive thoughts and all of that can be so derailing. So all of those human functions that are supposed to make life better can activate our threat brain, which doesn't make sense in zebras. You know, it doesn't make sense in mammals, because if they were vulnerable and isolating themselves and thinking about territory and not eating and not sleeping, they'd be picked off by the next available lion. But humans, we're a bit different, because we are top of the food group, top of the food chain. And so, you know, we are able to have these kind of mental health conditions develop that means that we struggle, and that we do then kind of isolate ourselves. We might become, you know, withdrawn and try to. So, you know, what you're doing with depression and what you're doing with trauma is you're just trying to make the environment safe, you know, and that often involves a retreat, doesn't it? But the tricky brain, clients are loving it, you know, people are buying it, and I'm getting really nice feedback. Actually, right. It really helps clients to picture and hold on to that and normalize and validate it. And I do it routinely with, you know, people at sort of session 2 as an introduction to actually, this is what it's like to be human, and this is not your fault. We've all got these brains, and yeah, it's really powerful. If people are interested in learning more, you can have a look on my website and buy it that way as well.
I think it's brilliant. I mean,
thank you.
Everybody I work with, when we begin to do the sort of neuroscience, the psychoeducation stuff, really love this stuff. In particular, young people are fascinated by this stuff. Here's my brain. I carry around with me on my iPad.
Oh, very modern.
It's got all the functions on it.
Yeah.
But I love that idea, because there's something quite tactile about it as well.
Oh, definitely.
You created this bag of tricks for people.
I can say, oh, hold on a minute, like that's about caring and soothing, that is, and talk about that, and you know, that's about, oh, that's territorial, isn't it? That sounds like, actually, and you know, the fact that when you're working with somebody in person, they can hold that, and it isn't my fault that I feel like that, you know, it isn't my fault that I'm not eating at the moment because I feel so terrified. It isn't my fault that, you know, I find eating difficult, because actually now I know that I wasn't really allowed food when I was younger, and you know, I was always told that I needed to be grateful for this awful food that I didn't want, and it's really set up a negative association with me. It really normalizes some of that.
And who in particular is it designed for? Is it designed for patients? Is it designed for professionals? I mean, who are you hoping is going to use this?
Yeah, so it's designed for professionals. So patients could get use from it, and it certainly comes with a a book that tells you how to use it. But my thinking is that actually it's multi-use. You can use it time and time again. And so my thinking is that it's a professional kit to help people who are already working with people who are depressed or traumatized to really normalize some of that. So, it's got utility in education settings, it's got utility, in mental health and therapy and counselling and, forensic settings as well, occupational therapists. It's such a wide application of people. I've used it in sort of multidisciplinary team meetings to help think about people's care needs, to help formulate. Yeah, but it's a really useful way of formulating a client. So when we say formulating, it's just an idea of the problem and what's keeping it stuck and why it developed. And the staff teams have really enjoyed that, and it really presents it in a way that makes them think and connect to it.
I think it's a great tool, Marianne.
Thank you.
When you tell me about it, I thought, wow, that's really. I was saying, like, wish I'd thought of that. Everybody has these great ideas that sort of, and I never seem to have time or the vision to. So you're still working in the NHS, which is quite important to you. You've got a private practice as a therapist.
Yeah.
And you do this sort of, I guess, consultancy and training as well around. Do you help if people want help from you about understanding how to use the tricky brain, for example? Are you available to sort of do consultancy around that?
Certainly, yeah, that's certainly something that could be looked into. Right. So I've had chats with people about it, but yeah, that's certainly a direction that would be more than okay.
Great, and we'll put all your details up about how people can.
Thank you.
But while you're here, if people are listening, how do they get hold of you? What's your website?
Okay, so it's www.goodthinkingpsychology.co.uk, and you can find me on Instagram, and I'm not very good at Instagram, I'll level with you, and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter
any of them
as well.
No, because I'm rubbish at that stuff.
Yeah,
I'm rubbish at most things. I have no idea why I have any success whatsoever. There you go. I sort of bumble along somehow and get things done. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and thank you for being human.
Well, thank you for being human. Thank you for inviting me. It's been effortless, actually. I can't believe we're at time already.
I know. I told you that, didn't I?
I know, you did.
An hour and a half. I'll fall asleep halfway through. I'm like that boring. No, it does fly, and I think one of the reasons it flies is partly because all the people that come on are fascinating people who've got really interesting stories, and really, I love finding out about motivation of healers and what they're passionate about, because I think it's endlessly fascinating, actually, sort of how people get into things, and I particularly love it when I meet a professional who knows what they're talking about, like yourself, but he's also comfortable with being a human being, and connecting it to real life experience, because I think that's where the juice is, to be honest, because that's where we can sort of encourage people to forgive themselves a bit,
for sure,
be human and accept experience and accept that life has an impact upon us, whether good or bad. Also, I think at this particular point in time, and I'm sort of going to make this point, I'm conscious of when I say these things, I don't want to undermine the fact that people are really, really resilient. But these are really extraordinary times, folks.
They certainly are.
And they are unprecedented. It has not happened in a long, long time. And if you are feeling odd, don't ignore that. Really don't sort of minimize at all. And in some ways, I'm particularly saying this to guys. It's one of my bugbears is that 75% of suicides are men, and a large part of why guys get into that situation is because they minimize their sort of mental health struggles and say, oh, it's not as serious as, it's not as bad as.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you can ever say. If you're in any sort of psychological distress, whoever you are, the thing that's going to save your ass is what we call help-seeking behaviour. Start seeking help.
That's an appropriate safety-seeking behaviour. That's what we want to encourage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't ask for help. Go and talk to people who know what they're talking about, like Marianne. If you can't get hold of Marianne, you can get hold of your local what's called IAPT services. Give them a call. If you do IAPT plus the name of where you live, it'll take you to do relevant wellbeing services, your GP, talk to your friends. I don't care who you talk to.
Talk to someone you trust.
Talk to somebody and just get it out there. And, you know, don't hold it inside yourself. And if you are struggling at the moment, welcome to the human race. It's tough.
For sure.
It's really tough at the moment. Marianne, thanks. Really, really amazing to have you on the show. And
such a pleasure.
We shall bring you back at some point.
That would be nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. See you next week. And as usual, I don't know who's on next week. We booked somebody, they tell me, and I can never remember because I get too involved in what I'm doing. So I'm just useless, waste of space, but there you go. Really lovely to have you all here, and see you all again next week. Bye-bye.